Deftones is a band with strong roots in the alternative metal scene. They started out as a nu metal band that went from simply playing heavy riffs, screaming, and rapping a bit, to creating a more nuanced sound, mixing shoegaze, electronic samples, and pop-inspired melodies into their metal music. Because of their willingness to experiment, they've sometimes been called the Raidohead of Metal. Let's find out if they actually deserve that title. Deftones is a band from Sacramento, California, and was formed in 1988 by founding members vocalist Chino Moreno, guitarist Stephen Carpenter, drummer Abe Cunningham, and bassist Dominic Garcia. During their first 5 years of being a band, they constantly changed members, but this changed in 1993 when the group stayed the same for a while, with Chi Cheng as their new bassists. Stefan, Abe, and Chino were childhood friends who all went to the same high school and bonded through skateboarding. During their teens, they listened to everything from Metallica, Anthrax, and Primus to Faith No More, Bad Brains, The Smiths, and Depeche Mode. They also noted funk, rap, and other types of rhythm-based music to be a huge influence on their music to begin with. They wanted to make something that people could easily nod their head to.
We grew up kind of in a I guess you'd call it the hood, whatever, and that's all the music we were surrounded by, just beats. At that time, it was the late '80s or mid '80s as a kid, and everybody's cars driving by just bassing and bumping, and rhythm was a big part of what we did. So for me, I was introduced to metal really in getting into this band.
Now, it was first when Chino found out that Stefan played the guitar that he suggested that they play together. So they started to practice in Stefan's garage, and in 1993 and 94 they started playing more shows around their local area, and also extended to playing in San Francisco and Los Angeles alongside now well-known band Gore. While playing in LA, they got the attention from representatives from Maverick Records and got the opportunity to do a record deal with them, which they did. Deftones started working on their first album in 1994. It was recorded at Bad Animal Studio in Seattle, Washington, and released on the 3rd of October in 1995. Terry Date was the one who helped them produce it, and he went on to collaborate with them on their next 3 records as well. Thanks to their good work ethic of touring, they managed to build a solid fan base that shared their music through word of mouth and through the internet. And as a result, the album went on to sell over 200,000 copies. Since its release, it's been noted as one of the first albums of the nu metal genre. In 2015, Stereogum published an article saying it had gnarly detuned guitar riffs and chunky dissonant chord progressions that swept listeners up in their churn like a deadly undertow. It had crisp hip-hop beats and harsh hardcore breakdowns. Chino Moreno's vocals surged from breathy whimpers and sing-rapping to piercing howls and shrieks. Most of the songs had that I'm about to break feeling. That frightening sonic violence that has retrospectively marked nu metal as an outlet for misplaced male aggression. Now, moving on, we find Deftones' second album, Around the Fur. This was also recorded in Seattle, but in a different studio called Studio Letho. Released in the fall of '97, the album was dedicated to Donna Wells, the stepson of Max Cavalera, who died in his early 20s. Quote, "When we went to make this record, we really didn't have any set idea of what we wanted to come out with. As a contrast to the recording of Adrenaline, which went really fast, they decided to take their time with this one. They gave more thought to the production, Abe experimented with the drum setup, and Moreno became more varied in his singing style. They were also lucky enough to create some hard-hitting singles that gained them airplay on radio and MTV. Since MTV was the mainstream channel for discovering new music at the time, their popularity went through the roof, and they were able to play much larger shows and festivals such as Ozfest, Roskilde, and Pink Pop. Now, on June 2000, they released their third album, White Pony. It was recorded at the Plant Recording Studios in Sausalito, California, and at Larrabee's Sound Studios, West Hollywood. At this point, they invited Frank Delgado, who did the turntables, synths, and samplers for their previous records, to be a full-time member. The band spent 4 months in the studio creating and recording the material for this record, and with all that time came a big departure from their previous sound. Frank Delgado's samples became a more central part of their style, as you can hear on Teenager. Chino has also mentioned that he changed directions in songwriting too by bringing in an element of fantasy into his lyrics. Quote, "I basically didn't sing about myself on this record. I made up a lot of storylines and some dialogue even. I took myself completely out of it and wrote about other things."
I watched you change.
They also brought in some guest artists for this album, like DJ Crook, Rodling Getzik, and Maynard James Keenan, to give the record some extra flair and versatility. And despite of getting pressure from the record label in terms of time, they made sure to make something they were all happy with. And I think the results speak for itself. This record became their best-selling effort to this date, and is generally considered both by fans and critics to be their best album. In 2003, they started working on another record. Having proven that they could juggle different genres with White Pony, they decided to take a step back with this one. Bassist Chi Cheng commented, quote, "We've proven that we can musically go in any direction we want, and we want to get kind of heavy on this one." Chino decided to do professional vocal training after he severely hurt his vocal cords during their summer tour of 2001, and luckily enough, he was still able to sound like this after the damage. During the recording of their fourth album, they decided to build a studio into their rehearsing space in Sacramento. They brought in Terry Date to assist them with producing, and also received some input from Greg Wells on the instrumental arrangements. Ultimately, the album cost them a whopping $2.5 million to produce, and on top of that, they were fined by the record label because they failed to release within the deadline. Originally, the album was named Lovers, but Chino changed his mind because he thought it would be too much of a hint towards what his lyrics were about. Despite it being one of the leading figures in alternative metal at this point, some reviewers criticized the album for not being as risk-taking as their previous effort. As mentioned before, they took a big step back and focused more on being a heavy metal band. Now with their next album, Saturday Night Wrists, they started working with Bob Ezrin as their producer. The reason why they wanted Bob instead of Terry Date was simply because they needed to mix things up a bit and challenge themselves. Quote, "Working with him is just putting us fucking upside down. He's cracking the whip." In addition to Bob Ezrin, they also brought in Sean Lopez as an additional producer as well. Apparently, the band started to sink into an emotional rut during the making of their self-titled album and Saturday Night Wrists. All of a sudden, making records wasn't that fun anymore, and as Abe said in an interview with Metal Sucks, quote, "Saturday Night Wrist was the absolute, just the worst time you could ever. And here we are in a band, we're brothers having a blast, and everything should be great, but it absolutely sucked. But we figured out that it was us making it suck. We were making it way harder than it needed to be. There were issues with certain things in our lives and things getting picked up along the way and all this crap. The album was released in late October in 2006 and featured new collaborations with singer Annie Hardy from Giant Drag and Serj Tankian from System of a Down. After doing a world tour promoting and playing Saturday Night Wrist, the band soon decided to plan their next record with the working title Arrows. The album that was described as unorthodox and aggressive was starting to take shape in late 2007 and was about to be recorded in 2008. But on the 4th of November that year, bassist Chi Cheng was involved in a car accident, leaving him in a state of coma. This halted the recording process, and the band decided to use their blog on their website to update their fans on Chi's condition as time went on. A friend of the band, Sergio Vaga, filled in on bass shortly after, and despite the band hinting that the album was about to get finished, they decided to further delay it with the hopes of creating something that represented them even better. Quote, "As we neared completion on Arrows, we realized that this record doesn't best encompass and represent who we are currently as people and as musicians. And although those songs will see the light of day at some point, we collectively made the decision that we needed to take a new approach. And with Chi's condition heavy on our minds while doing so, we needed to return to the studio to do what we felt was right artistically." Korn members Brian Head Welsh and Reggie Fieldy, along with members of Sevendust, Slipknot, and other alternative metal bands, recorded and released a song for Chi, with proceeds benefiting Cheng and his family. But this wasn't all. The band also wanted to put up 2 benefit concerts in LA in 2009 to further help their friend who was severely in need of healthcare. Despite the problems along the way, Deftones didn't leave their fans waiting too long for a new album. In May of 2010, they released Diamond Eyes, an album that a lot of their fans and critics praised and noted as similar to the style of their second album, Around the Fur. Drummer Abe Cunningham affirmed that there were definite similarities between how they recorded and felt while recording those records. Each was done really fast, but we were back to having a great time doing what we do again, exactly the way it was way back when we did Around the Fur. The band, up until this point, experienced emotional turbulence, they wasted time, overspent their money, but luckily enough, things started to move in the right direction again. Abe summed it up nicely in this interview. Quote, "Anyways, on Diamond Eyes, Chi had his accident, and that had a profound effect on how we do everything, and on us as individuals, and still does to this day. That made us stop in our tracks and say, look man, know what? We've been treating ourselves and each other terribly. We're in a band, dude. We get to go around the world and play music. Come on, man. Our brother is down." It put everything into perspective. We were like, let's keep on writing songs and see what happens. We had no plan on making a record or anything at all. But the next day we were like, hey, we're gonna make a record. We never really looked back. During the creative process of Diamond Eyes, the band chose to rehearse their songs for some time before they went into the studio. On their previous albums, they recorded everything layer by layer using Pro Tools, which was a very tedious and slow process. They wanted to avoid that this time and ended up creating and recording all the material within 4 or 5 months. The lyrics are again very fantasy-like, focusing more on creating images and paintings in your mind rather than telling real-life narratives. Whenever I personally listen to this album, I rarely think about the meaning behind the lyrics. I simply listen to Chino's singing and how it interacts with the other elements in the song. Ultimately, this paints a picture in my mind and perpetuates a very strong feeling with it. Like Chino said himself, quote, I can sing about really odd things, and they don't necessarily have to pertain to me at all. It paints a picture. Those are the kind of lyrics I grew up with, like The Cure, really visual images and no storytelling. In November of 2012, Deftones released their 7th album, Koi no Yokan. Chino mentioned in an interview before the album's release that this was a peak for the band in terms of balancing out their sound. Quote, "There's a lot of aggression in some of the music, but there's also this very soothing element where there's a lot of soundscapes rather than attack, attack, attack the whole time. I understand that's a big part of our sound, but I really feel like we reached a peak on our dynamics on this record with those two qualities. The beauty of something and just straight out ruthless aggression." The band also emphasized how they went into the creative process with the same mindset as when they made Diamond Eyes. They wanted to be efficient and not take up too much time before releasing it. While creating the songs, there was no preconceived notion of what they wanted to make or how it was supposed to sound, which is why Chino has called it a very honest record. But the speed and the improvised nature of the creative process wasn't all. The creative duties were spread more evenly between the members as well. Creative ideas came from anyone in the band at any point, making the collaborative effort even stronger. Now, the name Koi no Yokan is a Japanese phrase referring to the feeling upon first meeting someone that you will eventually fall in love with. If you take a closer look at Deftones' discography, you'll see that a lot of their lyrics and themes relate to love. I think what's really unique about Deftones is their ability to not only balance aggression and softness, but similarly also balance themes of love and violence. Just take a look at the lyrics from songs like Knife Party, Rocket Skates, or Felicicera, and you'll get what I mean. In 2016, the band released their 8th studio album, Gore. Rolling Stone had a witty way of describing the sound and dynamics moving between Chino's vocals and Stefan's guitars, saying that it was like playing Morrissey to the guitarist's Meshuggah. Chino described their approach to writing the music for the album like this: if something sounded a little straight, we took a left turn and made things a little skewy. An example of the skewy and oddball approach can be heard on the bouncy guitar riff and heavy vocal effect on Acid Hologram. Stefan noted in an interview that he had a hard time getting into the feel of the album. About coming up with music for Heart's Wires, he said, "I had to embrace my inner psycho rapist to come up with a part and get into it. It's far from being Deftones' heaviest record, but it's also far from being their softest one. With Deftones, you get a bit of everything: soaring and aching vocals, powerful screams, jarring guitar riffs, and soothing soundscapes." I don't know if calling them the Raidohead of Metal is the correct term to use about them, but they've certainly created a style of their own, and I really appreciate them for doing that. Thank you so much for watching, guys. That was the end of the video. I just want to give an extra shout out to these people over at Patreon. These are actually the people that make it a lot easier for me to create these videos. So if you want to support me as well, then make sure you click the first link in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye.